Last session, we discussed about data binding in React. Actually, data binding, two types are there, one-way and two-way binding. We are first looking at one-way, then we will see two-way binding. So we are learning about how one-way binding works. So one-way binding, you learned how to handle different data types. So I showed you how we can binding. So we learned about binding primitive types like we have number, string, boolean, we have null, undefined. These are all primitive types. We learned how to binding non-primitive types. Non-primitive types means so we have like an array, like an object, like we generally call JSON a JavaScript object type. And you have seen how we can handle array of objects. So in our previous example, I showed you how we can create nested and handle nested also, binding the data and displaying. So what we are doing currently is accessing data from source and binding to the UI, user interface. But generally, to store the data, actually we are using a variable. In a variable, we are storing the data and we are using it. So in React, one important is, so do not use variables for storing data in component. Don't use variables for storing data in component. Why? Reason I explained. Why we should not use variables. So we should not use variables for storing data because variables are immutable types. They are immutable. They are immutable types. Immutable means their structure cannot change dynamically. So don't use variables for storing the data. Then how we can store the data? So what is recommended for storing the data in React? In React components, you have to use state. In React, you have to use state in React. This is a very big concept and this is very important. In React, what is state, how it works, we will see. Actually, what is the concept of state and why we need state? Generally, when you learned about web development, so in web development, you know that web applications use HTTP or HTTPS as protocols. You know that. Generally, web application use HTTP or HTTPS as protocol. I hope many of you people know that HTTP is a stateless protocol. It is called as a stateless protocol. Every web application problem is it uses HTTP. And HTTP is a stateless protocol. That's a very common thing. Stateless protocol means it cannot remember information between requests. It cannot remember information between requests. It cannot remember information between requests. That means actually what happens is, see, generally what happens, suppose we have server. We are having server. So we just have a server. Now, when we are dealing with server, we have two pages. We have page 1 and we have some page 2. Now what happens is somebody requested page 1. Then page 1 is loaded into server. When page 1 is loaded into server, a memory is allocated on server for page 1. All the interactions will happen in that memory. Once you finished page 1 and you are going to page 2, from page 1 to page 2, then whatever memory allocated for page 1, this memory allocated for page 1 will be deleted from server. And a new memory is allocated. A new memory is allocated for whom? The new memory is allocated for page 2. Now, what is the problem is, what happened in page 1 is not accessible to page 2. Page 2 is coming after page 1, but page 2 don't know what happened in page 1, because the memory allocated for page 1 is removed after the page 1 is finished. This is good, very, very good, because it saves lot of memory. It is very good in security. It is very good in memory management. So memory is very well managed, but this is not good every time, because suppose you want to check your emails in Gmail. You opened Gmail website. In the first screen, it asked login. You entered user ID, password, and login. After login, it showed you inbox. In inbox, there are 10 mails. So login is finished. You are watching that there are 10 mails. Now you want to watch first mail in detail. Then you clicked first mail. It will ask login again. It will ask login again. You entered login details, but those details are deleted after that action is finished. That means now imagine, for every email, you have to log in and check. That is not a great one. That is called stateless. Stateless means it works with a mechanism, go, get, and forget. That means it will establish connection with server, allocates memory, completes its actions. It will destroy the memory and come out. That means the memory allocated is not accessible to others. This is called stateless nature. Stateless nature means your application cannot remember information between requests. So stateless nature is good. That means stateless nature of application is good for server. As why it is good? As it manages memory. It manages memory very well. So it manages memory. That's enough. It manages memory. But stateless nature is not good for client operations. That means it is not good for continuous operation. Continuous operations, it is not good. For continuous operations, it is not good, because once you log in, you need to continue all until you logged out. But for every screen you want to log in, then it's not a great idea. That is not good. So why we need state management? That means how to handle this problem. That means the point is very simple. You can handle this issue by implementing various state management techniques. We can implement various state management techniques. There are so many different types of state management techniques we can implement. Actually, we have different types of state management techniques, like application state. We have like session state. We have like cookies. So we have like cookies. All these are different state. We can even use query string. All these are state management techniques. By using these state management techniques, we can make our application remember information between requests. So what is the purpose of state and why you need state? A simple point I explained. So we are developing web applications, and web applications are stateless because they use a protocol HTTP. HTTP is a stateless. Stateless means it cannot remember information between requests. So to handle this issue, we need to maintain some state for our components. So actually what happens here is React components can manage state for application. They can manage state for application. There are so many ways to manage state. I will explain different techniques. We will learn about that. So React component can manage state for application. But what happened is, so state was available. So in React, state was available in React up to 17 version, only with class components, But what happened is React 18 and higher versions introduced state for function components also. Function components. Actually, in old React interviews, people ask what is difference between function component and class component. A component can be created with function and class. Class I will tell you later. So then in majority of answers up to now, actually how developer gives answer that one of his answer is function components cannot have state and class component have state. Actually, in many online websites also, you will see this difference they tell. This is no longer valid point. Why? Because now React function components can also have state. So, but that is a valid point earlier. But now function component is having everything what a class component is having. Earlier, we don't have that. That is the reason lot of difference between a class and a function. But all those are minimized. All they are reduced actually. So people used to tell stateful components, stateless components. But currently, function component also can have state. Earlier, function component cannot have state. But now we can have state in function component. How? Actually, React function component can handle state by using a hook. Hook is nothing but a method. By using a hook called, we have a hook called use state. We have use state hook. By using use state. We don't have this in old React. That means up to React 16, 17 versions, there is no use state. But from React 18 onwards, they introduced this use state. So it is a method which is used to create a state and maintain a state for function components. And very important, it is use state. Actually, use state is not for class component. It is only for which component? Function component. For class component, state is different. How it is done, I will tell you. But use state is only for function component. It is not for class. So that means use state is a hook introduced into React to maintain state for application. It is always recommended to use state for maintaining your data. Store all your data in state. Store data in state, not in variable. What is advantage of state? Actually, state is mutable. It is mutable. Variables are immutable. So state is mutable. It can change according to situation, So it is mutable. Because already I explained, function components must be having only mutable members, not any immutable members, right? Now let's see how to configure that, how to define a state and how do we work with the state. Let's see. I will give the basic syntax and all how to handle, right? This is a component. Let's clean up. This is actually data binding. So this data binding will return. So just a div and we will put a container, class name container fluid. Okay. Now here I will keep as state in React function component. Okay. That is just the heading I given and you can see that is working here. So how do we configure the state and how do we define the state? Let's check. It is still compiling. Okay. Now this is fine. This is there. This is function component. Now, how do we configure the state? First, we have to import. We have to import use state from React. So from React, we have to import use state. Use state is a function. This function you have to import from React. You have to import from React. Now observe carefully. This use state is actually initial state. It is initial state. And generally it is saying that it is returning stateful value. And they started this from 16 and higher versions, and it is now professionally available from 18, right? Now the point is, what is this syntax you will understand later, because for that you need to learn TypeScript, because the library of complete React is built with TypeScript. So later you will understand that. Initially, observe here. So this is a state. That's a state. Now what this state is actually, see, once you configured use state, here we need to define variable. We need to allocate memory. We need to allocate the memory. How to allocate the memory? In JavaScript, you know, you learned in JavaScript destructuring technique. I hope you learned destructuring technique, because JavaScript ES5 onwards, it provides destructuring. We use destructuring technique to handle the data. Actually, destructuring is nothing but, for example, suppose you are having some variable called some names. And the names is a array type. In that you have some John and you have some David, something like that, like Sam, some names are there. We want to store every name in independent variable so that we can independently handle them. Then generally what we do now in modern JavaScript, we use destructuring. That is a very basic thing every JavaScript person learns. How we do destructure? Where? So we say user1, user2, and user3 is equal to user3 is equal to names. That's it. This is a destructuring technique. That means now what happens? The value of John will be stored in user1, it will be stored in user2, it will be stored in user3. That means whatever collection is present in this, it will be separately handled in these areas. This is a general destructuring technique these days we use everywhere in JavaScript. So now what happens is here, how you configure the state? We have to declare a constant. We have to define a constant. Here, lot of questions are there in interviews. Why a constant? Because JavaScript have var, let, const. 3 keywords are used for declaring. We can use var, we can use let, we can use const. So why we need to declare a constant? So you know the rules of constant. What are the rules of constant? What are the rules of constant? Constant rule is, first thing, constant must be initialized. It must be initialized. It will not allow assignment. It will not allow assignment. Once initialized, it will not allow assignment. Here, so many tricky questions are there, I will tell you. So another point is constant is block scope. It is not accessible outside the block. Another is constant will not allow hoisting and shadowing. Shadowing, hoisting are not supported by const. So it is a perfect restricted type. So in the constant, we are configuring 2 things. One is I am defining, so actually state contains, you see, you are allocating is equal to use state. It is a hook. It is a use state hook. Actually, this allocates, this use state is going to allocate a memory. It is going to allocate memory. It is going to allocate memory. In this memory, you can store some value. You can store some value. Now, how to get value and how to set value? How to read value from state and how to set value from state? To get value and to set value, you know, in JavaScript, you have learned accessors. You learned accessors. In JavaScript object-oriented programming, we have getter and you have a setter. These are accessors. Getter is used for reading the value. Setter is used for storing the value. The read-write operations in any property are managed by getters and setters. Now, what this use state is expecting here a getter and a setter. That means you can give any name. These are formal names. That means, for example, user name. That means that is a getter. And we have set username. This is a setter. That means the first one is to read, second one is to write. That means if you want to store any data in state, state means it allocates memory. It allocates memory. Now what happens is, in this memory, what should be the type of this username? That means first one is getter. It reads the value present in memory. Second one, it stores the value into memory. That stored value you can access by using username. And in many interviews, they ask that you are writing constant and you are saying it is mutable. Constant means it cannot be assigned with a value. Na? It cannot be assigned with a value. Then how you are saying that state can assign value? State can initialize and state can assign. Can initialize and assign. But constant usually will not initialize. It will initialize, but it will not allow in assignments. So in many experienced people interviews, this question is asked. How you will justify this? Because if you use constant, that means you cannot assign any another value. But in state, any number of times you can assign a value. Why? Because concept is very simple. Actually, this syntax is, this is not assigning value. This is not assigning. At the time of declaring itself, you are sending value. That means this is called initialization. What useState will do is, it initializes a new memory every time. It initializes a new memory every time. That means whenever you use a setter, a new memory is initialized. In that new memory, you can store a value. That means every time a new memory is initialized. If a new memory is initialized every time, then you can store a new value every time. That means you are not assigning, you are doing what? Initializing. If anybody asks like how you can assign a value into constant, you should say that we are not assigning values. We are initializing values. State is not assigning value. State is initializing value. State is initializing value. So you need to define that. That means now how do we configure this? So syntactically we write like this. So how do we do that? Syntax. First we have to import. What to import? Use state. Use state from which location? React. After that, you need to constant create a getter and we need to create a setter. And this will use state. Use state. And very important, this inside this use state, currently, actually this use state is ready for any type. It is ready for any type. You can handle any type of data into it. Suppose you mentioned constant, some name and a set name. Remember, setter is optional. If you give only this, then it will have only getter. It will have only getter. That means it is read only. You cannot write anything into it. Right? Only getter will be there. Now what you can do is, into that use state, you can store some value, some John like this. That means in the state, what is the type of value stored? It is what type? String type. It is string type. That means you can define like this. That means now you can just only read. You don't need to write. Right? Later I will show you how do we set the values, how we can set the value. Initially we will just use read. Right? That means now we can say constant. We can say some products is equal to use state. We can keep it like this. This indicates it is what type? This indicates it is what type? Array. That means you can define constant and we can say product is equal to use state. We can say like this. What this means? It is what type? It is an object. That means you can put a 0. This indicates it's a number type. Any primitive type, non-primitive type, you can configure into it. So state is defined in this way. If you don't mention, then by default, it is any type. It can handle any kind of value. You can directly initialize value or later you can set the values, right? You can initialize the value, you can set the value. Setting is not mandatory every time. You can just initialize. Later how to set, I will show you, right? So initial, now see here, I'm just using this username. I'm just using that username, okay? I'm using username and I'm storing some username here, say John. Now I want to access and display that here. I will put a paragraph and I will say hello and I want to get username. Username is the value of state. I want to get the username. Here in the output, it says hello, John. That means how we can store the data and how we can access the data. So we are not directly using variables now. We are using state. This is the perfect way of storing data in React. In React, components never use directly variables. Always configure state and store data using state. And currently I am showing you just getter, how you can do that. For example, now see, I am using here constant. I will say some categories is equal to use state. And here it is an array. So I said some electronics. So I said some footwear, and I said some fashion. Like this we are defining. This is state. Now what happens? I need to present this. If I need to present, I will just create a heading. So categories. I want to present in an ordered list. Then we have to use a binding expression. What is the collection name? Categories dot map. We have learned how to read every category, and every category must be returned. It must return an list item. You know, it should have a key. Key is what? Category, and it should have the value. What is the value? Category. That means it is going to display those and show. Earlier example, I showed all variables. That is not good. That is not correct. Just because we don't know what is state, how state is configured, I showed that. So we need to do in this way. This is how we need to manage. Now, here, you can have any kind of data. Now you can, I think you can manage all type of data. Last session, I showed you nested arrays, array objects. You can try anything. For example, what I will do, a constant, and we have some products. Products is an use state. Use state, it is an array of objects. In this, we have name. So you have price, something like this. And another one, we have name. So we have Nike casual like this. Yeah, we have price, and we have the price details like this. Now what we want to do is we want to print that in a tabular form. Then just what we will do, we will create here is products table, and we will create table. So, and let's keep the class as table and table hover. And here we are using row. In this row, we have T head direct. Yeah. We'll use a T head in the TR, in the TH, and we have name, and we have price. And let's present the table body. So in the table body, we need to create here products dot map. We need to read every product, and every product have to return a row, and row have a key, that is product dot name. And here in that row, first cell should display product dot name. Second cell should display, what is it? Product dot price. Now you can see this is how it will display the data. So how to store data and how to access the data, that you have to do like this. This is the concept of configuring a state, storing data in the state, and accessing. How to set, we will see that, right? Here we are initializing data directly. We are initializing data. It's a number, it's a string, it is an array, it is an array of objects. We are directly initializing the data. So this is how we need to manage data in React application. This is example, right? Same example I am using. So what is the file name is data binding dot what? JSX. That is the same file I am using. This is the configuration of a state. This is accessing the data, binding the data. This is one-way binding. Now we will see how we can handle the concept of two-way binding. Two-way binding. Two-way binding means accessing data from the source and displaying in UI, identifying the changes happening in the UI, and update back to the source. But React cannot do that internally. React don't have any such facilities internally. You have to manually do it. You have to manually handle it. How? Let's see how we have to manually handle. What is two-way binding? It is the process. It is the process of accessing data from source and binding to UI, and identifying the changes in UI, and updating back to source. This is the process. So that is two-way binding, accessing data from source and binding to UI, identifying changes in UI and updating back to source. And one of the main issue is React is not supported with default two-way binding. Then how you will handle it? So you have to manually manage by using events. You have to manually manage by using events. You know how you do in general JavaScript, similar type of concept here. That means, for example, let's see, actually we are having a variable. We are having a variable user name. In that there is some John. Now I want to display that in a text box. Then how to display in a text box? To display in a text box, we usually write like this. Document dot get element by ID. So that is txt, some text box name dot value. What we have to do is equal to, so user name. So whatever present in that username variable, it will be stored inside the text box. That means now text box is having the value called what? John. And if anybody modifies that, then we need to update into that username. For that, actually, in JavaScript, we have to write an event on change. We have to write an event called on change. Later, you are going to learn detail about events in React. In React, we will learn about events, right? A separate session will be there. Initially, all JavaScript events you can use here. On click, on blur, on change, all JavaScript events. On change indicates, that means on change, what we do is, we will write a function. Function is what? Name change. Some function will be there. What this function will do? This function will collect the value and update into that username. That means what? Username is equal to document dot what? Get element by ID. Get element by ID what? txt name dot val. So in the previous state, what it is doing, it is collecting the value and displaying here. Now what it is doing, it identifying the change in the value and updating back into the source. This is how we have to manage in JavaScript and in React also. In React also, we have to do the same. It simplifies one way, but two-way, there is no option. Then you have to manually manage that. It simplifies one way. How it simplifies one way? Just here we have to bind, what is it? Username. We have to bind the username. You don't need to use document element by ID and all this. But two-way, going back, there is no option in React. You have to manually implement this. And this is not satisfied for React developers. React developers are not interested in this point. That is the reason later React will show you how to use third parties, which will simplify this process. Without you manually write, they will manage. But that is not directly internally available in React. We have to implement through third-party support, right? As of now, how you will manage that? Let's see how you can manage. Let's see the example here. Okay, I will remove this now. Let's create a simple interface. Let's design one simple interface here. I'm creating a simple header data list. So data term, I will say user name. I will put here a text box. Here input type is equal to text. Now in this text box, so we need to display the value. We must able to bind the value. Here so many restrictions will be there, so many problems. That means I will show that. Generally, what we need to do is we will create a state. That means we will configure constant. One is so user name. And this is only getter. We need a setter also. Set username. And it is using use state. And username is what type? String. I'm configuring as a string type. You can leave it empty. By default, it is what type? Any type. You can handle any type of value. You can restrict a string or number by just configuring that, right? Initially, now, what happens? There is nothing inside it. So for example, suppose I'm using some value. That means I want to identify the changes in this, collect those changes and update. Actually, if I want to bind, we have to use value. To the value, we are binding username. I am binding that username there. That means what it will do is it will access that username and it should bind that username there. But you see here, this username value, that means what is defined. When to bind, how to bind, all these you have to tell. Because you are binding into a text box, then you need some events. You know, in JavaScript, you use body load. Body load means when page loads at that time, bind the value. These all things you have to define. Here also you will have such content. But as of now, see here, what I am doing is, I am just writing one simple logic. So whatever value entered in the text box, we have to collect the value and we need to store in which reference? User. You need to collect and store in the username. So first I will use here John. Okay. Now this value I want to display here. I will put a paragraph and I will say hello and I will collect the user name. That means by default it is coming. This is one way happening. Now whatever I do here, I enter here, it must be collected and update here. I need to update into here. So we need to write one function. What is the function? We have to write a function. We need to write a function. Function is nothing but username changed. Username changed. Usually in React projects, developers have a tradition, which you will see very regularly. They will write like this because use event handlers. They will write like this, handle name change. Like this they write. We can write anything, doesn't matter because it's a function. But usually handle is the word which developers use regularly to tell that it is an event handler, right? You know, JavaScript events have event handlers, right? They tell that event handler, this is related to name change. So when this function should fire up, this function should fire up when they are changing in the text box, So what we will do here, what we are going to do here is we will define on change. On change, what we have to configure, which function to execute. We have to use handle change. Handle change is the function to fire up. That means whenever any value is changed in text box, you have to collect that value and you have to use it here. That means now how to collect the value from the text box. How to collect the value from this text box and use that value. In JavaScript, when you learned events, you will learn about event arguments. I hope you learned about event arguments in JavaScript. Event have two event arguments. One is this, another one is event. JavaScript events have event arguments. Two event arguments will be there, default event arguments. One is event, another one is this. Event is used for sending information about event, and this is used for sending information about object. That means in general JavaScript, this is your JavaScript. I will show you. So this is your JavaScript. In JavaScript, suppose we have button. So that means we have a button. Button have an ID, btn submit. Button have a name, submit. Button have some class, btn primary something. Now this is a submit button. Now on this button click, we will write on click. On click is what? Submit click. Submit click. On submit click, we pass two arguments, this and event. I hope you learned this in JavaScript. This will send information about current object. Current object means button ID, button name, button class. And event sends information about current event. Current event means click. So where they clicked, which button clicked. So all such x-axis, y-axis, position, everything. Have they used control with click? They used shift with click, everything. You can get event related details using event. Object related details by using this. Generally what we do, we write a script and a function. What is it? Submit click. On submit click, so obj gets object details, e gets event details. Now I am writing here document.write. So I am writing here, what is it? I want to get button ID. How to get the button ID? obj.id. I want to get the button class. Which class is used for button? Then we have to use obj.class name. I want to get the button name. So that means I want to get the button name. Then I have to use obj.what name. I want to get the information where they clicked on button. That means X position. X position where they clicked. Then we have to use E dot client X. It will get the X position. So these all are object related details, event related details. And you generally JavaScript sends this information through event arguments. That means every event contains these arguments. When I click the submit button, those all details will come. The button ID, the button class, the button name and position where they clicked. Actually, JavaScript event have two arguments. One is this, another one is event. In React, we have only one argument. And that argument is actually, in React, we are having only one event argument. This event argument can collect object related details as well as event related details also. But how it will get object related details? It will get object related details by using event.target.id, event.target.name, event.target.class name. Like this it can get. How it can get event related details? Directly event.client X like this. Like event.keycode like this it will get. Like event.which like this it will get. These are event related details. That means in JavaScript, two arguments will be there, but in React only one. And that one argument can access both object related information as well as event related information. Object related information is accessed through target. Event related information is direct. That means now in our event here on change, what should happen on change? So here, what we will do here is on change, let's go. On change, we use event. What this event? You can use any reference name. E is also enough. I will give reasonably event. I need to collect. That means this refers to this text box. I want the value entered in the text box and store that in this username. Am I right? That means what is the state? State is what? Set username. This is setter. What to set into that username? Value. What is the value? Event dot target dot value. This indicates what value entered in text box. Because target refers to text box and directly event refers to on change. That means now what happens here is when user is typing here, that means when user is typing, that name will come here. Whatever user is typing, it is going to display here. That means not only accessing data and displaying, but taking back the data and binding. Here you will learn so many things. Don't get excited into the questions immediately because we haven't learned all the concept, right? You are just learning one basic thing. Event is a big concept you will learn later. State is very big concept. You are learning level by level, right? As of now, just concentrate on what we discussed in the current context. Don't go in depth about events and all these things. You will learn. That is the basic concept. That means we will learn events as a separate concept. But this is the mechanism of two-way binding. That means now actually what happens here is we will put the text box with a value. Value is what value? Username. And very important, in this username, by default, what is there? It is having John. That John will come here. The default value what you entered. And I make any change into that. That change will update here. That means it is accessing the data and presenting, identifying the changes and updating back. So whatever data you entered, it is there. And you click here and you are doing some modifications. It will update. It is going to update. This is two-way binding. Accessing data from the source and binding to UI. Updating the data back and storing in the source. Actually, other technologies which are similar like React, they support two-way binding. When they support two-way binding, you don't need to write all such events. Without writing events, they can simply manage. They have internal process for that. That is very good. But having two-way binding have certain issues with this type of libraries. That's the reason they disabled that. And those issues we will learn, we will discuss. Lot of security injection issues will come. To avoid them, they have designed only one-way technique. But if you want two-way, you have to manually implement the two-way by using this method. That is, now you need set state. Set, this is setter, this is getter. What is set username is doing? It is collecting the value when user is changing and it is updating into this username. We have to collect that and we can display anywhere we want, right? This is actual mechanism of two-way technique. So you need actually two things. You have to manually manage by using what? Events. That means generally what we do here, syntax I will explain here. We have a constant, so name and a set name. And it is using state. And in that you have some John. Like this we have defined. How you bind this? We have input type is equal to text. To the value, you will bind what is that name. After binding that here, we write what on change. On change, we will define a function handle name change. Now what this handle name change will do here? It is, that means we write a function. What is the function? Handle name change. What this handle name change will do? It will get an event argument, and by using that, it will set name. Set name. What is it? Event dot target dot what value. It will get that and store. Now you can display that anywhere you want. Suppose we are displaying here what name. That is the basic process. You declare a state, initialize some value. You attach that value to any control. Identify. Remember, many people ask like on change is the event I have to write every time. No need. You know different events. You can use on key up, on key down, on blur, on focus. On change means what? Immediately when the value changes, every character change. For example, suppose I am writing here another event, not on change. I am using on blur. I am using on blur. You know JavaScript blur event. Generally what happens on blur if I define, I am entering some details. You see, I am modifying here. It's not modifying. It is not modifying. That means you can see here, I click inside and I am doing modification. It's not modifying. But we can make it work. But for that, you need to learn some more tricks. That means you need to understand how to write the events. So now, can we handle modification of values on different events? Yes. But as of now, two-way binding recognizes only one event. What is that event? On change. That means it identifies the changes by using on change. That means what you have to do, you can use blur and all. Later I will show you. But you have to use on change for identifying the changes. So here once important note we will say here. The note is two-way binding uses only on change as default event that identifies the changes in UI. This is what you have to do. You can use other events which you are going to learn. So that means on key up, on key down, on blur, on focus, all JavaScript events we can use here. But in general two-way binding, you have to identify the changes by default by using which one? On change, right? This is very important. So make sure here the event is on what? Change. On change. Now it will allow the changes into the data. You can make the changes. That is important point. And it is not just text box. I'm just using a text box. You can use any control. Let's do one thing. I will copy this example first. This is an example for two-way binding. So two-way binding. For that, we created a state. In the state, we can store the data, we can access, and we can use. Now the question is, if it is a variable, how you will do it? If it is a variable, that means if it is not a state, if it is a variable, that means now actually this username is not declared as a state. You declared it as a username. So username, you declared with some value. This is directly you defined. And how you can set it? For example, you are setting username is equal to event dot what? Target dot what? Value. You are defining in this way. So that means now you are doing the same work in another way. And you see it's not editing. I'm doing some modification. It's not editable. It is not it is mutable, right? It is not mutable. It is immutable. It cannot change. And you can observe here, we are using on change only. We are using on change, but variables will not allow to change, right? That is the reason we don't recommend using of variable. Right? This is one important thing. Now let's see some complex type so that you can easily handle. What I will do here, I will create a div. So just put a class name as row. And here we will put so now I will put a class name as call. So 3. And I will put some main. And here I will keep a class name as class name as call9, something like. And here I am defining some details. That means I will create a form. I say register product. And here I will create a data list, data term, name. And for that, we have a text box. Input type is equal to text. And after that, you have some price and data definition. Input type is equal to number. We are using number. Another data term is a city. And the data definition, here we have a drop down. In the drop down, we have an option like some Delhi. So option like some Hyderabad, like this. And another data term, so we have like stock. And data definition, I'm using like input type is equal to checkbox. And here I am defining checkbox as available. Okay. And you can see for this, I'm using class. So class as form control. And here also class name as form control. And here we have a class called form select. And here we have a class name as form switch. And here we have a class called form check input. So these are the options. So this is a form we designed. This is a form we are having. That means user can enter the name, user can enter the price. So user can enter the city, right? And user can select stock. And based on that, I want to display the details, what he selected. Then how do we collect the data and display? Right? That means now what we will do is we will create. So we will create here a constant. And the constant contains, suppose product. And we have set what? Product. And this product is use state. It is an object type, which contains name is a string, which contains price, which is a number, which contains city is a string, which contains stock. Stock is a Boolean. We have false. Like this, we are configuring an object. Now, what we have to do is we need to identify the change in every field. That means now what we have to do here, we need to write function handle name change. Now, similarly, I need to write a function. So this is handle, which one? Price change. And handle function, which one? So city change. Handle function, another one, what is it? This is stock change. And every option contains an event argument, E. E is defined as event argument here. And what we have to do, set product, but set product is an object type. In that object type, what we have to do here, we need to get name. Name is an property. In that name, what to store? In that name, what to store? We have to get E dot target dot what? Value. Then what about price, city, stock? Price, city, stock, we should get what is present in the product. That means you can't leave it like this. If you leave it like this, when you are entering name, only name it will take. All others it will keep empty. That means suppose previously you entered some price and you come to name and type name, it will delete price now. That means we need to keep all the details. What is the next detail? Price. Price should come from where? It should come from product dot what? Price. So city should come from where? Product dot what? City. Stock should come from where? Product dot what? Stock. That's how we need to define. That means only what is coming here from text box, that is name. Same point you have to do here also, but here name is coming from which location? Product dot name, but price is coming from the text box. E dot what? Target dot value. Price text box. Now the same you have to handle here. Now here it is what? Product dot name. Okay. Yeah. Product dot name. And the city is coming from where? E dot target dot value. One more option is there. This is also what? Product dot name. And stock is coming from where? So stock is coming from E dot what? Product dot what? Stock. That is what we need to define. And we need to display these details. And we need to write on change now. On change, what to do? Handle which one? name change. Here what we have to do, on change, what to do? Handle price change. Here what we have to do, on change, it is what handle what? City change. What is this checkbox? Checkbox also on change, on change. What is it? Handle stock change. Oh, so handle stock change, handle stock change. Now those details we want to display here. We will put a data list, data term name. Name is coming from where? Product, product dot what? Name. That is the state. State is product. In that there is a property called name. And what is the next one? Price. Price is coming from where? Product, product dot what? Price. Another one, what is it? City. City is coming from where? So product, product dot what? City. And actually Boolean is not a string, stock. Then what we will do? We will write an expression. If product dot stock is equal to true, then it should show a word called, it should show a word called available, available. Otherwise it should show out of stock. Like this we are defining. Now you can see this is all the default data. I will give here, so a heading as details. And you can see that is details. And you entered name and it will get that name and show here. You entered some price, it will get the price and display. You selected city, it will show. You selected stock, so it is having some problem. What is that? Target you haven't mentioned. Stock, it has to get from E dot what? Target. Okay, that is the problem. E dot target dot stock. Okay, now you can see here, I will refresh and I entered some name and some price and some city and some stock. Then it should say some problem is there. Where is it? Handle stock change, E dot target dot stock. Where is the value? Well, let's check in the console. Is there any error? Not there. On change, we haven't written handle stock change. Acha, it is not actually target dot stock. It is target dot what? Value. Value. But actually it is not target dot value. It is target dot checked. We are using checkbox. Na? Checkbox have a property called checked. Checked will return true or false, not value. Okay. Now you can see here, because depending on which element you are using, you have to define. Huh? So now you see here, and it is available, it is out of stock. Because checkbox is not having value. Checkbox is having a property called checked. Checked. We have to get the checked property and we need to display. Whether it is available or not, we need to define. Now this is a simple example of how it is using two-way. Accessing the data and binding, identifying the changes and updating back. This is one example of working. This looks very lengthy process. You will claim that my JavaScript is more better than this, because JavaScript doesn't require so many events to write actually. But that is how React do. That's all. That's what I told you, drawbacks. In the drawbacks, React internally have lengthy process. So developers make it simple by implementing what? Third parties. Right? That is the reason the way how React does, we are not satisfied with that. That's the reason we will use third-party implementation. A lot of third-party implementations are required. Then it becomes very simple. You don't need to write much, right? You will see, you will gradually see that. But this is how it handles. This is the concept of one-way binding. Another concept is two-way binding, right? This is enough. Now, tomorrow we will discuss how we can access and bind the data coming from any APIs. We will learn about APIs, how to manage them, right? Tomorrow we'll do that. Okay, right.